Today I'm talking about uncertainty. And I don't normally throw jokes in, but there's a little bit of one here at the beginning for you. This is a bumper sticker I saw, and I guess you can get t-shirts and coffee mugs and things like that. And it says, "Militant agnostic. I don't know, and neither do you." Now, a couple weeks ago I was talking to Charity, and she shared a story with me. She had been telling someone about our church and describing the fact that we have people here from so many different backgrounds and beliefs. And not only do we have a service together, but then we dare to circle up and talk about it afterwards. And the remark, and it was the gist of the remark was, how do you keep from arguing, or how do you keep from fighting when you have this discussion? And that's an interesting question, and one that we're going to deal with some today, because how do we manage to come from all these different perspectives and have not only a good discussion, but have it in a way that is civil and loving and compassionate, even if you disagree with somebody else? There's probably a lot of answers to why we can do this, as many answers as there are individuals who come to this church. I have my answer, so this is my perspective on it. I don't get into arguments with you about your beliefs because I truly don't care what your beliefs are. Now this isn't meant to sound harsh, but when you first say it, it's like, oh, you don't care? No, I care greatly. I care about how you live. I care about what you do. I care about how you interact with me and with others. How your beliefs drive that is most definitely important. But if your beliefs, whatever they are enabling you to live kindly and compassionately with care for others, then I really don't care what the beliefs are. I care about the end result. It's the actions that matter. You can condemn people for what they think unjustly. And I think in error, what you should really be doing is focusing on what people do, because we all, without exception I'm sure, have thoughts that we wish we didn't have. We have hatred in our hearts and anger and all the other issues that humans have. But it's how you act on them or don't act on them that matters. That's what defines us as a religion, as Unitarian Universalism. How does our service, how do our beliefs cause us to live in this world? And so I don't lie awake at night thinking, oh, everyone doesn't think like me. That's irrelevant. It really is. What matters is how we get along and how we care about each other. So that is the no-nonsense answer that I have for this. How do we get together and have discussions and not fight? That's how I do it, because I'm not trying to convert anybody, and I don't think anyone here is. But there are people who have this drive, unfortunately, that they have to convert people. And if someone's beliefs cause them to want to convert me, then it becomes very uncomfortable. You don't want to have to interact with someone when you're constantly waiting for the next, well, have you ever tried this? Or wouldn't you want to do this in your life? Or wouldn't you want to believe this way? When that happens, your relationship is really ruined, and it's very unpleasant. And most of you have shared stories of this with at least one person in your life at some point, so you know what I'm talking about. The root cause of this unpleasantness, I think at least one of the root causes that comes between people, that puts these walls up, is the curse of certainty. Here's an example of certainty right now in the news that's causing a great deal of pain. Most of you have probably at least heard the story of the Kentucky County Clerk, Kim Davis, who refused to issue marriage licenses because she's opposed to same-sex marriage. Not only does she refuse to issue them to gay couples, she refuses to issue them, period. So that way she can't be accused of discriminating. Not only that, she refuses to allow any of her deputies to do it. So her office is no longer doing its job in issuing marriage licenses. And this, it went through the courts, even went up to the Supreme Court, and a judge told her to start issuing licenses, and she refused, and she's now in jail for contempt of court. Now this must be maddening for the people who live in that county Not just the couples who were suing, not just the ones who were denied because they were gay, but anyone who's just trying to get a county clerk to do their job. And she is doing this, she is taking this stand, no doubt, because of her certainty that she is pleasing God, and her certainty that marriage can only be between a man and a woman. And so she's decided to become a martyr for this cause because of her certainty. On a more frightening level, we have certainty causing horrible atrocities. One example, but only one of many, are the atrocities carried out by ISIS in the area of Syria and Iraq. These people, in full belief that what they're doing pleases their God, execute people, they enslave people, they actually rape people as part of their worship. They destroy ancient ruins, and the list goes on and on. They are certain that they are justified in their actions based on their understanding of their scriptures. And apparently they do these things with a clear conscience. Dr. Christopher Driscoll is a professor of religion and Africana studies at Lehigh University. He wrote an article I recently read called Uncertain Humanism in the Waters of Whiteness in the July-August issue of the Humanist magazine. Now, in context, he's examining the Black Lives Matter movement and asking humanists if Black lives matter to them, or is modern humanism just mired in unconscious racism? So that's not the topic of today's sermon, but I wanted to acknowledge the context because he has some wonderful quotes I'm going to share with you. Just understand he's sharing them in the context of the certainty, say, of a humanist saying, well, we're not racist, or the certainty that they don't have to deal with these issues as humanists. But this idea of certainty and what we're talking about, you'll see as I share these quotes, applies on a much broader scale also. I entitled this sermon, The Importance of Being Uncertain, but I could have entitled it, Certainty Kills. And this is a quote from his article, and even acknowledging it, still a little bit plagiaristic, so I came up with something else, but it's a great line. Certainty kills, and it kills because it has to pretend. There is no actual, and listen to this line, there is no actual certainty available to humans, only the means of faking a certain identity that tries to conceal all of the myriad intellectual and social uncertainties that mark human life. You may not agree with that line, but let it settle in a little bit. There is no actual certainty available to you, but you can fake it. You can pretend there is. You can take stands that you are absolutely 100% certain on something, but are you really? Can you really be that way? In the case of ISIS, certainty does kill, literally. In the case of conservative religious fundamentalists in our country and others, certainty can kill in other ways. First, on the extreme end of the spectrum, there are actually some in our country and some in other countries who actually do it, execute or incarcerate people simply because they're gay. It's hard to believe, but there are people out there doing this and believing this as we speak, and it's also in our country. If they had the means and the laws behind them, they would. Probably a very tiny minority, but I have read such writings. Certainty can also kill common sense and compassion, and rational thinking. Kim Davis can't see how strange her behavior seems because she is surrounded by people who are telling her what a great thing she's doing. And the opposing view is simply shrugged off as satanic or evil or uneducated or ungodly. And if all you do is surround yourself with people who reinforce what you already believe, it's easy to form a certainty. A false certainty, but a certainty nonetheless that will drive you to, say, spend days in jail and break the law and not do your job. Concerning certainty, author David Foster Wallace writes this: there's the whole matter of arrogance. True, there are plenty of religious people who seem arrogant and certain of their interpretations too. They're probably even more repulsive than atheists, and he's referring to the arrogant atheists who will argue with absolute certainty. But the religious dogmatist problem is exactly the same as the unbelievers. Blind certainty, a closed-mindedness that amounts to an imprisonment so total that the prisoner doesn't even know he's locked up. So, is your religious dogmatism, is your atheistic certainty so strong that you've imprisoned yourself, your thinking, in a way that you don't even know you've imprisoned yourself? Certainty is not just a pitfall for believers. And Wallace, of course, does make what I would say would be a gross overstatement that all atheists believe with absolute certainty there's no God, because that's not true. But there are certainly those that do. And they claim to know things that are beyond their capability of knowing. And this applies both to the religious believers and the atheists when you make absolute statements. And they could end up no better off than Kim Davis by refusing to acknowledge that they might be wrong. When you hold something dear, can you honestly say to yourself, I could be wrong? Most of you do. I've heard it from you. It's a good thing to instill in yourself, the possibility that you were wrong. Closed-mindedness to that concept imprisons all people. Driscoll, who I quoted first, the humanist, urges humanists to determine the direction our humanism is oriented. Towards certainty, security, and facts, or uncertainty, compassion, and attention to the limits of what is possible as humanists and as humans. Now you could take that statement and plug in other beliefs besides humanism. What is the direction your Christianity is oriented? Your Buddhism, your paganism, your Unitarian Universalism. What is the direction it's oriented? And he gives you two choices. Certainty, security, and facts, whereby you can become closed-minded and certain. Or are you oriented towards uncertainty, compassion, attention to the limits of what you can really know? Are you aware of the limits of human knowledge? And does that apply to the statements you make and the things you believe dearly? Can we acknowledge that there is so much we don't know and can't know? Do we really wrestle with that? Or are we obsessed with certainty and security? That's the thing he's arguing about, or not arguing about, but posing to each one, posing to the humanists in his article. How are we orienting our humanism? How are we orienting our congregation? Earlier I asked, how do we keep from arguing or fighting during our discussion circle? Here's a few things that I came up with. We acknowledge the limits of our knowledge and the limits of what we will be able to know as humans. 2, we avoid absolute certainty and allow others to find meaning in ways different from our own. And I hope that's true of everyone here. I think it is. 3, we don't impose our ways on others because we know all too well that even in the things we cherish most and hold most dear, we could be wrong. I think everyone acknowledges that here. Massively, life-changingly, alarmingly wrong in something we hold so dear. Do we constantly inspect and analyze and think about the things we cherish with that in the back of our mind? Let me constantly test this. Let me see if I made a mistake. Finally, we listen to others, respecting their paths and being open to learning new things. Perhaps one day we will adopt some of these ideas that we didn't necessarily agree with initially. Certainty might cause us not to listen. So it is better to be uncertain. Uncertainty is also a desirable characteristic in our lives because it can help us not to lock in on single-minded opposition to things that we should be open-minded about. Again, Driscoll gives an example from his article, Talking to Humanists, but it can apply to many people in different belief systems. As humanists, too many of us seem preoccupied with fighting against the God idea, when at the end of the day, in a multiverse where there is no God or gods, There really is no such thing as an atheist or a theist. There are only people who make meaning based on what they worship, in the face of what they have been told and conditioned to worship. Now, to paraphrase that, he's saying, let's just pretend that the atheists have their way, and you live in a world where there are no gods. No one's talking about gods. Their words atheist and theist aren't even used, because that's not an issue. What do you have in a world like that? You still have people who are trying to make meaning of their lives, what they worship, if you will, in the face of what they have been told and conditioned to believe or worship. So we constantly get inputs. From the moment we're able to understand our parents, we are getting inputs about what we should believe, what's right, what's wrong. And so even in a world where you're not worried about the gods, you're still going to be wrestling with making meaning in your lives. So don't waste so much time fighting against something. Use your time to make that meaning in your life. Because he said, if you won that battle and everyone stopped believing in God, it wouldn't change what you're still doing in your lives. You're making meaning. And of course, I'm not bringing this all up to say everyone should be atheists. I'm just saying, he's pointing out, if you're just fighting against something all the time, what a waste of your effort. Now, I understand all too well how easy it is to focus on the negative. And those of you who've been with me from day one and earlier, you know I had a lot of baggage to get rid of with my fundamentalist upbringing. And it's something that still bothers me to this day because I lived that life for so long and I know what happens. But I can't come up here in the pulpit and just be negative every time I speak. That doesn't help you. And even if the threats are real or the knowledge that I impart is real, you have to be focusing on the positive too. You need to be moving towards the meaning that you're making in your life. So I concur with what he points out in his article. During the week, as I was writing this, as happens so many times, various things came up that fit in nicely. One was the whole thing with Kim Davis, which I've already shared with you. I am pretty certain that she truly believes in her heart that what she's doing is pleasing to God. She really sees herself in a battle against the forces of darkness led by a literal Satan. And these forces are seeking to destroy this nation. She is willing to spend time in jail to make a spectacle of herself because she is certain that what she's doing is pleasing to her God. She refuses to do the job the government expects her to do. She refuses to compromise, even though she lives in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, and you have to have compromises for such a society to function. Her stands, carried to their logical conclusion, would make our society as it exists impossible. And it would lead to a rupturing of our nation into a multitude of factions, and we see this going on all around the world right now. Certainty kills, literally. So I have to fight negativity. You know, I've shared the story, and maybe I'm contradicting exactly what I'm saying, but it is something that's going on in the world. But I have to fight this negativity in my mind because these things happen, and because I was Kim Davis. I know how to think that way. I lived that life. I know how you can become so certain of something. And I also know that people can change dramatically because I've lived that life too. So I don't want to rail against these dangers every week. And yet, even as this is going on, I noticed I did a little research because I started seeing Republican candidates lining up to support her. And I thought, surely not all of them. Surely not. And there are a couple who said, no, she needs to quit and do her job. Do her job or quit. There were two people out of all the Republican candidates, Lindsey Graham and Carly, however you say the name, I always trip on it. Those two are the only ones who boldly came out and said, this is a government job. You do the government's work if you take a government job. On the other hand, we have Mike Huckabee, who says, having Kim Davis in federal custody removes all doubt of the criminalization of Christianity in our country. So, I think this is going to come as a big surprise to all the Christians who haven't been jailed, but when you use language like this, A once actually quite valuable and noble Republican Party has come to the point where serious candidates for the presidency have made statements that Christianity is now illegal in our country. And it's hard to be positive when you read something like that. Certainty kills. Certainty kills common sense. The second example that I came across this week was a movie called Going Clear. It's an HBO movie. It's about the Church of Scientology. It's a frightening organization that claims to be a church for tax purposes, but what it really does is bilk its followers out of all their money through an endless array of courses they go through to get wiser, clearer, whatever terminology you want to use. But what struck me was the parade of high-ranking officials who have left the church, who have been harassed and sued and threatened since leaving, who would sit there in full public view, name and position stated, and tell you all the stuff that's going on, and then they all said, and I can't believe I was that stupid, that I shut my mind to it. One guy said, I was in this for 30 years, I never looked at anything critical of Scientology that whole time, and I feel like a complete idiot for what I have done. Whatever you hold dear, make sure you look at something that's critical of it from time to time. Do not assume you've got it all figured out. Their regret was incredibly deep and painful to watch as they shared what was going on. One of them even admitted that as he had gone up the levels of education and massive expenditure of money, that they finally revealed the backstory of the church. That he was confronted with the mind-blowing science fiction story that all of us, all humans, are possessed by formless alien entities called Thetans, exiled here by an evil galactic overlord. These aliens were thrown into volcanoes and then had nuclear bombs dropped on them, and now they're bodiless and they float around and they possess us. And he said, even after I read that, and I thought, this has got to be a test. They're really testing me. If I believe this, they're going to kick me out. He stayed in. And he just shakes his head and goes, I can't believe that I just kept doing this. They had invested so much time, so much money, so much effort, so much hope, so much desire in this that they just couldn't break away. You lose your family and your friends. And the cost of critical thought and skepticism becomes too high, and they allow themselves to be duped. It's easier. They had to accept the strange teachings as certain truth. Certainty kills. One mark of any cult is a powerful leader who is not questioned. And if you are seeking truth and meaning in your lives, and you encounter anyone with these sorts of characteristics, run away. If anyone writes a book and says, this is the absolute truth, I've got it all figured out, and now I'm going to share it with you, and if anyone disagrees with me, they're wrong, don't waste your time. The good authors will acknowledge, here's what I believe, here's what I think works, here's my theory, but when they start saying, this is it, absolutely, don't question me, if you want to know the truth, you follow me, run away. You don't want to be in that group. You want to be in groups that allow you to think and allow you to question and don't condemn you when you do, and don't tell you, you just got to have faith, and don't tell you, oh, you're just hurting yourself with all these doubts. When they do that and don't address your questions, leave and go somewhere where people acknowledge uncertainty. That's where it's healthy. That's my opinion. And you can disagree, because I'm not telling you it's absolutely true, so you don't have to run away. I have no doubt that the people who come here are evolving and will continue to evolve in what is important in their lives. And that is encouraged here, and that is why I was excited the day I stepped in this building for the first time, and it's why I'm here. Because it encourages your growth, your evolution, your change, and it encourages you to look at all the wonderful resources, sources of meaning that have come up through humanity since the dawn of time. There's so much out there you can look at and read and study and share with and go to. And you should be encouraged to do these things. And we encourage you to do so. And the moment this church stops doing that, leave.
Are you sure? Yeah. Are you sure? Are you
That
sure?
one I'm sure of. If we ever start saying, you don't go, for instance, if you're a pagan, don't go to pagan assemblies, don't go to pagan meetings, just come here. If you're Buddhist, like I am, don't go to a Zen center. Just come here. If you're Christian, you are encouraged to go to some of the Christian churches here if you want to for various things. I would never tell you not to. And if I do, I'm wrong. I have no right to do that. You must find truth and meaning. And I hope you work at it. I do. I hope you take this wonderful gift seriously and are grateful for the freedoms we have in this country. Taking a principled stand on uncertainty, on issues with which we can't really honestly speak with certainty, is a moral imperative. I mean that. I don't say that lightly. If you can't really know with absolute certainty that there is or isn't a God, you shouldn't be speaking with absolute certainty. You can say, this is what I believe, this is what I think, this is how I live my life. But when you start saying, we absolutely know this, one way or the other, you're saying things that can't possibly be true, because you as a human cannot possibly know things that are beyond your understanding. That's what I think. And therefore it becomes a moral imperative to acknowledge and allow as this doubt. Now yes, we will each choose particular paths, and what is meaningful to you might not be meaningful to someone over here, and might not be meaningful to me, and that's okay. Because I dare not claim absolute certainty that only this path is pleasing to the God I understand, or only this path is pleasing to my intellect and my reason. When you do this, you are exhibiting arrogance, you're showing hubris, and what we need in this country and in this community are leaders, religious and secular, who stop acting like they know best, and that those who disagree with them are either evil or stupid. Uncertainty and humility should be virtues, preached as such throughout our land. Less demands of unthinking faith and more praise of uncertainty from our pulpits would help our society immensely. So for the sake of our community, for our congregation, and for our world, I would urge you all to be militant agnostics. Thank you.